The Seraph's Fate. The Rule of Three, Book 1. By Adom Sample. Prologue. Anaya. Enter a realm unlike anything you've ever known. Trust in me, and I will show you pleasures you've read of only in fantasy, the voice said. As I gazed into the open view of the dreamland I'd found myself wandering, I couldn't help but to notice the dark figure in the distance. It was there I would meet him again. He frightened me. I couldn't tell what it was that made me shudder when I saw his eyes, but some part of me wanted that sensation. The lavish touch of his skin sent me into a fever of guilt and pleasure. I knew I shouldn't have been doing this, but my nature compelled me to take the chance. He saw in me what no other could. He was my fantasy, my dream. I awoke in the same field I had for the past few weeks. Each night I was brought here, and I didn't know how or why. As I lay sprawled on the white grass, I couldn't help but breathe in the hypnotic fumes that filled the air. It was enchanting, as much as it was daunting. The weight of my presence in this euphoric realm forced me to pull myself up. I stood and took in the sights that seemed to change every time I entered this realm of bliss. The sky was a dark blue, littered with red and orange clouds, and the ocean in the distance reflected the light of the sky. What was this place? And who brought me here each night? These were the questions I needed answered. Someone was doing this. But whom? I needed to know. I took a step forward. The ground rippled with each footstep, as if raindrops were falling into the ocean. That didn't deter me from pressing on. I had to see what lay beyond the view of my surroundings. Never had I attempted to venture beyond where he told me I could go. Those were just whispers, however. I had to see it. I had to see him. Go no further, Anaya Myers. You know not what you seek, the man whispered. He was a ghost I could not see, taste, or touch. I ignored his warnings, which was something I hadn't done before. I took another step and hit an invisible wall. You must heed my warning, or forever be lost here, the man said, this time more fiercely. What is this place? I called. No answer. Are you there? Again, no answer. Frustration overwhelmed me. I pushed my fist through the wall, and glass shattered all around me in slow motion. I covered my head with my arms to protect myself, but the shards of glass soon transformed into golden butterflies. Nevertheless, that didn't stop them from cutting me. That was your choice, the man whispered. I gazed at my arms, and they were coated in blood. The glass-like butterflies had cut me well. What were his intentions? I needed answers. What do you want from me? I shouted at the sky. A dark figure suddenly appeared. I couldn't tell if it was a demon or an angel. But within seconds, the figure was inches from me. All of you, he said sensually. My heart dropped. The erotic tone of his voice compelled me to run. The meadow became a bright blue cloud, and it felt as if I were floating in midair. "I want all of you," the man said again. No matter how far I am, he was there. Always. The golden butterflies swirled all around me. They lifted me from my feet into the sky. "I want you to be mine, Anaya. Forever." He floated behind me, gaining. I didn't know whether to feel bliss or terror. He was closing in, and the soft touch of his fingers caressed my toes. The pink nightgown I wore faded from my skin. Soon, I was naked, with only my sweat to cover me. The atmosphere felt as if it were 90 degrees Fahrenheit, as the butterflies burst into flames all around me. The heat was almost unbearable. I welcomed it, however. The man who had brought me here, who had whispered in my ear every night, had finally caught up to me. "Why are you doing this? Who are you?" I asked, frightened. He transformed from a dark figure into one of the most handsome men I'd ever seen. This man had to have been over 6 feet tall. He was muscular with well-lit golden brown skin, light gray eyes, and blondish brown hair. The closer he came, the better I could see him. He had a tattoo of a red dragon on his right forearm, and a tattoo of angel wings covering his chest. I wasn't ready for something so handsome. He grabbed my ankles and pulled me in, opening my legs wide. I was frozen. I couldn't react. "I'm doing this because I want you. I always have." He licked my toes and caressed my inner thighs. Who are you?" I stuttered. He looked up at me and smiled. "Your salvation." His entire body radiated with golden light, and his head motioned deeper between my thighs. I closed my eyes and allowed it to happen. I'd given in to the feeling when suddenly he stopped. "Give me permission," he commanded. "What?" "I'm asking for your permission." "Permission for what?" "To continue." He pressed. I opened my eyes as we floated among the red and orange clouds. It was then I realized the power I had. "I won't," I said defiantly. He was taken aback. "Why do you refuse me?" "Because it is what I choose to do." He released me, and I smiled. I was in control. I knew that now. "Soon, Anaya Myers. Soon you will not refuse me. You will succumb, just like so many before you," he whispered soothingly. He faded to nothing, leaving me alone, afloat in this abyss. My wounds from the glass healed, and I descended back to the meadow, where I laid my feet on the white grass. Rejuvenated, I put my head back on the ground, where I had been before. I closed my eyes and welcomed slumber. Chapter 1. Anaya. "Anaya! Anaya! Wake up! You're gonna be late!" shouted my roommate. My alarm was going off, and it annoyed me to no end. I smashed the off button with the palm of my hand and looked at the time. 9 o'clock in the morning, and my first lecture was in 30 minutes. "Oh shit," I exclaimed. Tossing the sheets to the floor, I jumped out of bed, and then I ran to the bathroom. My hair was a mess, and I didn't have time for a shower. These dreams were going to be the death of me. Each night they'd become more erotic, more sensual, more real. I couldn't worry about that now, though. My first class was about to start, and I was far from ready. "Professor Lapkin doesn't like it when his students are late," said Saya Fisher, my roommate and best friend. I doused my face with soap and water and reached for a washcloth near the towel rack. Of course, the towel rack was empty. I needed to start doing laundry more regularly. "Here," said Saya, tossing me a fresh towel from the closet. I grabbed it and wiped my face promptly. I needed to hurry, or else I'd be in for one of Professor Lapkin's sermons. I wasn't sure why he'd taken such an interest in me. Usually, professors didn't care if you were on time or not. It wasn't as if he were paying for my doctorate education. With the way he'd always single me out in the crowd to answer some of the most complex questions in our class, one would think he was. I ran a few brush strokes through my hair and put on jeans and a t-shirt before heading out. Saya and I had planned to rent a townhouse in Centerville, Virginia, but that idea went out the window when we realized how much traffic we'd have to endure on the way to school every day. To be closer to the main campus in David King Hall, where most of the classes were held, we decided to rent a townhouse in Fairfax. It would only take about 10 minutes to get there. I just hoped traffic on the I-66 wasn't screwed up as it was most days. Saya, who was a first-year law student at George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C., didn't start class until next week. She was going to spend the day reading up on case law and sightseeing near the university. I wished I could join her. We'd planned to attend college together since high school. I'd done my undergrad at George Mason University, while she studied at NYU. Granted, New York was a 4-hour drive from D.C., but we still missed out on those freshman college years together. Now that we'd matured, all those late-night drunken parties were a thing of the past. I was pursuing a PhD in psychology, and she'd be busy with her studies as well. It was time to get serious. Words couldn't describe how ecstatic I was when I found out she was accepted into GW. With our combined income, we were able to get our own place. The DC metro area was expensive as hell, and every penny mattered. My father was an investment banker and was happy to pay for my education. He gave me a choice: doctor, lawyer, or accountant. Luckily for me, I had always wanted to be a psychologist, so our interests aligned. Saya was in the same boat. Our fathers were partners at the firm they'd founded, and her father gave her the same ultimatum. I thought we were going to be psych majors together. We both had undergrad degrees in psychology. But Saya decided to get a master's in philosophy while at NYU. I guess that sealed the deal on her wanting to pursue law. That was fine by me. "Hey, don't forget this," she said. I looked up and saw a small pamphlet flying toward me. It landed in my arms just as I was about to open the front door. I put it in my bag. "Thanks, Saya." I ran outside to my car. 15 minutes to spare. I was definitely going to break some traffic laws on the way to school this morning. I just prayed there wasn't an accident blocking traffic on I-66 as usually. It seemed as if there were an accident every 5 minutes in this area. I swear it was as if licenses grew on trees around here. My car, a red Nissan Sentra, already had dings and scratches on it from all the near accidents I'd managed to avoid since moving here. Regardless, I just hoped my drive to school would be smooth and without any delays. As I started the engine, I couldn't help but contemplate the dream I'd had. These visions had been going on for weeks. The same dream, the same setting, everything. Only last night was the first time the man was present. I'd told Saya about these dreams last week. She attributed them to the stress of starting my doctoral studies and the pressure my family was weighing on me to succeed. I only hoped that was the reason. Each time I dreamed of sex or anything that got me aroused, I'd usually wake up before anything could happen. Either that, or something in the dream would occur, stopping me from reaching orgasm in my sleep. I was glad I told that mysterious man in my dream to stop when I did. The last thing I needed was to wake up this morning in a wet spot. I'd been starting to find myself wishing these dreams would become more sensual. And last night, I got my wish. Now, I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. But I needed to get my mind off that for now. School was calling, and I didn't want to see Professor Lapkin's disgruntled face the moment I walked into class. I could dwell on those dreams some other time. I pulled out of the driveway and said a small prayer that traffic was decent. Chapter 2. Sylas. It was a game. My game. The game people play, be it for greed, pleasure, or control. I stand at the center of that game, unchallenged. She sat there, drinking her wine, alone with her Kindle, as if to say fuck off to anyone who dared approach. This facade wasn't lost on me or any other man who would lay eyes on her uneasy glance. I saw into her mind, invading her dreams. I knew what she was thinking. The barrier she placed around herself would soon fade once I unleashed my will upon her. That was the power of the Seraphim, cast out of paradise for my philosophical ideas when it came to humanity. I now lived among them, unimpeded, free from the morality of my creator and her subjects. They chose to lock me away for an eternity based on my exercise of free will. My kind was never allowed that. But I was no deviant. My goal wasn't to corrupt man, nor to bend them to do my bidding. The only motive I had was to see humanity free itself from the chains of imprisonment. Thus, I would feed my hunger by helping them release their own. Every so often, she'd move her eyes from whatever book she was reading to scan the room. She was waiting for no one, yet her demeanor told of something to come, as if she was waiting for someone to make an effort. Go to her, I whispered in the mind of the young man sitting in the corner, typing away on his tablet. No one could see my lips move, but the words lay upon his ears all the same. Go to her, I said again. He was an attractive, muscled man with dark skin and light hazel eyes, far more eye-catching than any other man in this room was. He had noticed her, but was too hesitant to make his approach. That would change today. He sensed my words, but had no clue where they were coming from. This woman would frequent Compass Coffee in Northwest DC, often after work, usually twice a week. I'd studied her, searched my mind, entered her dreams. Now was the time to act. I sat in the corner alone, watching and analyzing. Tonight was the night. Elizabeth Walker would know true passion this day. May I help you? Elizabeth said to the man I'd influenced into approaching her. She was arrogant and snobbish in her inquiry. Her eyes held clear disdain for being interrupted from her reading. Behind that, however, was a need that had yet to be satisfied. "Do you mind if I join you?" the man said. Before she could respond, he took a seat across from her. She sighed and turned away, giving him the cold shoulder. "Proceed," I whispered. "So, do you come here often?" he said. Elizabeth rolled her eyes and continued to ignore him. She flickered her hair and curled her lips as if to put on a show of contempt for his presence. "Compliment her appearance. Be sincere. Do not falter. Be dominant. Assert yourself." The man straightened his posture and leaned into her personal space. She backed away, finally making eye contact. "You're stunning, Miss..." He paused, waiting for her to reveal her name.
Elizabeth Walker," she said firmly.
"Beautiful name. So, I'll ask again. Do you come here often?" He shot her a slight grin.
"Often enough to avoid guys like you," she reproached.
"Guys like me?" He smiled. "How do you know what type of guy I am?"
"I know your type. Hanging around bars and coffee shops, looking for your next conquest."
He snickered. "Who hurt you?"
"Excuse me?"
She laid her Kindle down. "I said, who hurt you?"
"How do you know someone's hurt me?"
"Only a woman scorned would stereotype men the way you just did." They gazed at one another for a brief moment. I continued to study them. I felt their feelings. The emotional buildup within this woman was spilling out of her soul. I saw in her eyes the conflict, whether to open up to this stranger or dismiss him altogether. I wanted to see what she would do. Press harder. My influence on him was unrelenting. I needed to see how far Elizabeth would go.
"I don't know why I'm about to tell you this."
She glanced away.
"My boyfriend, he slept with my coworker. I thought she was my friend. I guess not,"
she confided. The man leaned back in his chair and raised his eyebrows. "I'm sorry to hear that. How long ago did you break up with him?"
"Who says we're broke up?"
she said, much to his surprise. He stood from his chair and walked around the table. They never broke eye contact. He took a seat next to her and gazed at her perfectly exposed cleavage before looking into her eyes again. "Why stay with him? Who's to say he won't fuck someone else?" he said into her ear. A tiny smirk formed on Elizabeth's face as she lauded his boldness.
"We've been off and on for years. I'm still in love with him. Anyway, why are you asking me all these questions? You haven't even told me your name." He moved the hair away from her ear and slowly touched her shoulder with his index finger. The sleeveless pleated mint green dress Elizabeth was wearing made it easy for him to see the white lace push-up bra underneath. It turned him on. I sensed it. "My name is Andrew Miles. I just started with the World Bank. I'm a financial analyst. I have a law degree, but my focus is in international law and finance and investment." "So you're a lawyer. I should have figured as much. Which law school did you attend?"
"I'm local. I graduated from Georgetown last month. I also work as a personal trainer when time allows. And you?"
"I work as a research analyst at some think tank you probably wouldn't care too much to know about."
He chuckled, as did she. Her barriers were coming down. All it took was a little confidence on his part and a touch of influence on mine. "It's getting late. It looks like they're about to close. Perhaps it's time for you both to go home."
It's getting late, Elizabeth. Maybe we should continue this conversation at a more private venue, Andrew suggested. I smiled. Indecision clouded her mind. Elizabeth didn't know where this was going, but she would play along nonetheless.
What did you have in mind?
She asked. Take her home. My home, said Andrew. She laughed and put her Kindle into her purse.
I'm not really into one-night stands. Besides, I'm not into going home with strange guys I just met. And I already told you I have a boyfriend.
A boyfriend who's probably cheating on you as we speak.
Whatever. I have to go. It's late and I have an early morning. It was nice talking to you.
She stood and placed the strap of her purse on her shoulder. Don't let her leave. Where will you go? Home? By yourself? Where's this boyfriend of yours?
What's it to you?
Andrew stood and walked in between her and the front door of the coffee shop. You deserve better. You know you do.
And I guess that someone better would be you, right?
Andrew moved a small strand of hair from her face and gazed into her soft brown eyes. Well, I don't know. Why don't you take me home and find out? He said assertively. Elizabeth bit her bottom lip and looked around to see if anyone was paying them any attention. Besides me, there were only 2 customers left. It was 7:55 p.m., and the employees were waiting for us to leave so they could close shop and go home for the night.
Do you live in D.C.?
She asked. Arlington, Virginia. I live alone. I bought a condo just last week. She looked down at her feet and became jittery. This was the first time a man had ever hit on her so aggressively. In her dreams, she behaved the same way. I expected as much, as this wasn't new behavior.
What is it you want from me?
Her voice was nervous. All of you. I want all of you, he said.
So, what's your plan? To fuck me and never speak to me again?
He smiled and moved in closer. I got up, threw some money on my table, and walked toward the exit.
See you later, Mr. Sampson. Come back soon,
said the barista as I made my way out. The barista called me by one of my many names from one of my many human identities. It was necessary to be a ghost among mortals, to be seen and forgotten just as quickly. I didn't respond. I kept my head low so Andrew and Elizabeth wouldn't notice me. Neither of them paid me any mind. I walked down the alley and took on my corporeal form and vanished from their physical reality. Now was the time to take my influence to the next level. I floated back into the coffee shop and hovered above them. No human could lay eyes on me. I descended behind Andrew and placed my hands on his shoulders. He felt my presence. It was warm and transcending. I gave him the final push he needed to seal the deal. I've watched you each time you've come into this coffee shop. I've never dared to introduce myself until now. Something came over me. Maybe it's the dress you're wearing. Maybe it's the curve of your luscious lips, or your smile. I don't know. All I do know is that I'm interested in you, Elizabeth. Now, what do you say we get out of here? It's 8:15 p.m., and I'm sure the staff want to get home to their families, said Andrew. Elizabeth turned around and saw the man at the counter was staring at the both of them. Not every man you meet has an agenda. Give him a chance. See what he has to offer. I whispered in Elizabeth's thoughts. Her guard melted at that moment. Their emotional output gave me strength. I needed to feel that.
one drink at your place. Then I have to head home. I live in Pentagon City, and it isn't far from Arlington. All right?
Her eyes were anxious. Elizabeth had never put her faith in a total stranger before. Nonetheless, after what happened with her boyfriend, she'd decided to open herself up to social situations, even ones as fast-paced as this. She was doing it beautifully. Andrew smiled and collected his things. He attempted to hold her hand as they departed the coffee shop, but she was still reluctant. He walked ahead and opened the door for her. They headed to Shaw Howard University Metro Station and took the yellow line to Arlington. My influence wasn't needed as much. They tended to strike up various conversations on their own. The train ride to his place proved to loosen the mood between them. After they crossed over to the Blue Line, they got off at Crystal City Metro Station and headed to his home. Andrew had purchased a 2-bedroom condo on Glebe Road, perfect for urban living, and it was only a mile from the metro station. Andrew had decided to drive to the station rather than walk or take the bus back home that day. He opened the passenger door for her, and she got in.
You're like one metro stop away from Pentagon City, she said.
Small world, huh? Andrew responded with a grin. It took them less than 15 minutes to reach his home. The moon was shining bright, and there was something in the air that seemed to increase a need boiling within them. The power of the Seraphim, my power, would help them explore themselves this night. They entered the condo, and he set his things on a nearby table.
Nice place you have here,
she said. Andrew took her jacket and hung it over his sofa. Their discussions on the way there had eased her tension. I was never far behind. I would observe. I would challenge them. Their passion needed to be resolved, and it was I who would bring them their fortune. I hovered above and engulfed Andrew's home in euphoria. They felt it. The sensation was burning them up. Their desire would become my power.
Do you mind if I take off my shoes? I've been walking around in these things all day,
said Elizabeth. Andrew came from the kitchen with 2 glasses of hot tea. Sure, make yourself at home, he said. He placed the smaller glass in front of her on the table as she removed her shoes. He gazed at her toes as she dug them into his soft flocati wool rug. Elizabeth crossed her legs, revealing her upper thigh as she reached for the tea. She didn't pull her dress down to hide the skin. It was then Andrew knew what she was doing. The mood intensified as I increased the level of euphoria in the air.
You never answered my question,
she said, before taking a sip of her tea. Which was? He responded.
Are you planning on one-night standing me?
Her gaze sharpened. Andrew removed his shoes as well and unbuttoned the first 2 buttons on his shirt. I don't do one-night stands, he said. Elizabeth took another sip of her tea before placing it back on the table.
Then what do you do?
She asked. Andrew smiled and moved over to the side of the couch where she was sitting. Her eyes widened. The scent of him was alluring, despite how much she tried to resist. He sat next to her and gazed into her eyes. Elizabeth's nerves were on edge, just as they had been in her dreams. I make love over and over again. He drew near, and I court her. I never let her go. I make her mine, he whispered. Sweat began to form on her bosom. Andrew placed his hand on her knee and rubbed back and forth.
Are we seriously gonna do this? We just met.
she said cautiously. Yet we've been in each other's presence for so long, one too afraid to speak to the other. I've fantasized about this for weeks, Andrew countered. Elizabeth overlapped her right hand with his and rubbed his muscled arm up to his biceps with the other.
But I have a boyfriend,
she stuttered. Not anymore. Not anymore, you don't, he said. She nodded and gave him a half smile.
You know something? You're right.
Elizabeth reached over to her bag and pulled out her phone. Andrew paused as he took notice of what she was doing. One text, 2 words, was all that was said to her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend.
It's over.
She sighed in relief, then threw her phone back into her bag and exhaled sharply.
I should have sent that text weeks ago,
she proclaimed. Andrew smiled and slowly moved his hand from her knee to her side. Are you all right? He asked. Andrew hadn't anticipated that she'd end her relationship so quickly. He'd believed she was kidding when she told him they were still together. She sat up and locked her eyes on him.
I am now.
Andrew closed his eyes for a brief moment as she caressed his cheek with the tips of her fingers.
What took you so long to approach me?
She asked. She took her hand and lowered it from his face. Well, you had "fuck off" written on your face every time you'd come into the coffee shop. I was afraid of rejection.
Just because we're here now doesn't mean I won't still reject you.
Why would you say such a thing? Why would you say that?
Because all men are the same. You're gonna fuck me, and I'll never hear from you again.
Reassure her. I would never do that. If that were my plan, I wouldn't have brought you to my home.
You promise?
Her eyes were frightened. Fear of being hurt again overwhelmed her. The thought of trusting someone was still terrifying. I promise, Elizabeth Walker. We don't have to do anything if you don't want to, Andrew assured her. She pulled away and stared at the floor.
I don't want to get hurt again. If you hurt me, it's not going to be good for you,
Elizabeth warned. He moved closer to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She didn't stop him, but she didn't completely give in. I've been single for almost a year. There's no way I would jeopardize the chance at a meaningful relationship, particularly with someone as beautiful as you. He pulled her closer.
What are you doing, Andrew?
Something that we both want.
Are you so sure I want this?
Your eyes tell me you do. I'm not a player, and I have no time for games. I refuse to resist any longer. Let's embrace this moment. Tell me you want this.
I don't know. What if...
Tell me you want this, Elizabeth. If you don't, I'll stop. His lips were almost touching her ear. The warmth of his breath made her hair stand on end. Both nervous and confused about his intentions, she tried to push him away. Kiss her, Andrew. What are you waiting for? I increased the passion in her blood. The scent of jasmine tea filled the room, and they both began to sweat. Tell me you want me. If not, I can take you home right now, and we can forget ever meeting. Is that what you want? His gaze was serious.
No, I don't want to forget meeting you.
Then what is it that you want? What I want is you. I want something to develop between us. Tell me you want the same. He held her tighter, and she stopped resisting his pull.
But I just got out of a relationship not even a few minutes ago.
A relationship that should have ended the second he put his dick in another woman. She averted her gaze and rested her chin on his shoulder. Slowly, she put her arms around him.
That's kind of harsh,
she remarked. Yes, but no less the truth, he said sincerely. Sensually, they began to rub each other's backs. Elizabeth soon found herself sitting in his lap, her legs wrapped around him. Andrew gently moved the strands of her brunette hair from her face. She was beautiful in his eyes. I'm amazed I had the courage to ask you here tonight, he whispered. She smiled and laid her head on his chest.
Promise me something,
she requested. Of course.
That we won't have sex tonight.
What do you mean? He asked curiously.
Not on the first night.
I thought you said you wanted to have one drink and leave. You have an early morning tomorrow, don't you?
I don't want to go home. It's depressing there. Would it be all right if I stayed the night with you?
Andrew furrowed his brow, wondering where this change of heart had come from. What time do you have to be at work tomorrow? He asked.
I don't.
But I thought you said...
I lied. It's Friday night, Andrew. You haven't figured that out yet?
She gave him a deceitful grin. Not everyone is off on the weekends. He smiled. I increased the temperature by 10 degrees. The moment was coming. All they needed was a little push.
Is it okay if I stay the night?
She asked again. Mi casa es su casa.
You promise we won't have sex?
I can't promise you that. If something flows naturally, I'll go with it. If you want it, I won't stop you. Elizabeth rubbed her hands on his chest and slipped her fingers under his shirt. She didn't know what had come over her, but I knew. Oh, I knew. Andrew unbuttoned the rest of his shirt and pulled it off slowly, then tossed it to the floor. Elizabeth was stunned by how gorgeous his body was. Well-defined abs and a muscled chest lay before her eyes. The short hair covering the center of his chest and the area above his navel was almost haunting to her. She didn't know how she was going to resist the man she'd so keenly asked to defy the allure of sex. Do you like what you see? He inquired. It was then Elizabeth realized she was staring.
You have a nice body,
she muttered. Elizabeth wanted to hold her breath so she wouldn't inhale his intoxicating fumes. Andrew took her hand and placed it on the center of his chest. She breathed in deeply, and droplets of sweat formed on her forehead as the euphoria I emitted soaked into her pores. Andrew felt it as well. Restraint was a useless endeavor at this point.
The hell with it,
she said, before bringing her lips close to his. However, Elizabeth paused seconds before her lips made contact.
No, I'm sorry, but I can't,
she began to say, and then Andrew grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her in closer. They shut their eyes and engaged in a kiss. It was passionate and surreal, just as I expected. Push the limits, Andrew. Allow us to see how far this can go. Slowly, he eased his hands up her dress, caressing her thighs and backside. She wrapped her arms around him and pushed her tongue into his mouth. Gradually, he made his way up to her bra band and with his thumb and index finger, unlatched the clasp. The moment was too far gone to turn back now. Elizabeth lifted her arms, allowing Andrew to remove her dress. Passion had gripped them both, and it was pushing through their veins. He gazed down at her pink floral lace thong. The smell of her made his mouth water, and his cock began to throb. Her inner thighs were shivering, but not enough for him to take notice. She then pulled away.
Andrew, you promised me no sex.
An alluring smile formed on his face. I made no such promise. We want each other. Just let it happen.
But I'm afraid. I don't want to get hurt again.
I would never hurt you. If I do, you have my permission to kick my ass. I won't even fight back. She lowered her gaze, breaking eye contact.
But we just met.
We're adults. Rules shouldn't bind us in a game that doesn't exist. Andrew hooked his index finger in the center of her bra and slowly pulled the material off. Elizabeth's nipples were hard, and sweat dripped down her breasts. Unable to fight temptation any longer, Andrew unleashed his warm, wet tongue on her luscious white breasts. The full figure of Elizabeth's body made Andrew salivate. He wanted to taste her entire body. She wrapped her arms around his head and pushed him further into her breast while arching her back. His bare chest brushed against her stomach. It made her moist between her thighs. She moaned as he continued to suck her breasts, tongue twirling around her nipples. Elizabeth hadn't felt pleasure like this in months. After she had discovered her boyfriend's infidelity, she'd closed herself off to everyone. If I hadn't invaded her dreams, it may have been years before she would allow something such as this to happen.
I can't believe I'm doing this,
she stuttered. Andrew grabbed her thighs tightly and pulled her flush against his body. His throbbing cock wanted to break free from his pants and boxers. Lust had them now. Elizabeth unbuckled his belt and unzipped his pants with fury. She couldn't negate the fact that she wanted him just as much as he did her. She hopped off his lap and pulled his pants down like a madwoman. He was just as intoxicated by the moment. Scratching his thighs in the process, Elizabeth threw his pants across the room. She looked up in shock. His massive, pulsating black cock was standing straight up. It called to her. Her hands shook with anticipation. She took a deep breath, and the scent of Old Spice soap filled her lungs. He was so fresh, so clean. They locked eyes and stood up. Elizabeth dropped her panties as they gazed at each other's bodies, motionless in complete silence. I increased the temperature by another 10 degrees. They would make love this night, passionately, without inhibitions. Elizabeth jumped into his arms and wrapped her legs around him. He clenched her backside with his strong hands and carried her to his room. Their lips were fully engaged from the tongue-locked kiss. Andrew hit a button next to the light switch on the wall near the bed, triggering the warmth from a fireplace on the other side of the room. They lay on the bed, and she climbed on top of him. He reached into a drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a condom. Elizabeth snatched it from him and ripped it open with her teeth. As fast as she could, she slid the condom onto his cock. My God, I never imagined this would happen, Andrew whispered to himself. He cupped her breasts as she lowered herself onto his manhood, pushing it deep inside. It stretched her walls as she moaned in ecstasy.
Oh my fucking God!
She dug her nails into his chest as she swayed her hips back and forth. "You are fucking gorgeous," he said as he took hold of her hips and moved her body up and down his cock. Their hunger was feeding me the power I needed to continue my work. The sweat from their bodies soon soaked the center of the bed. Andrew sat up and sucked on her breasts as she bounced on his cock. They flipped over, and he laid her on the bed. With each arm, he hooked her legs and raised them high into the air.
Andrew, wait, I don't think I can...
She screamed as he drove his cock deep inside her. She'd never experienced a cock of his size, and it was daunting. Every part of her was shaking, and her walls were swallowing every inch of him. Clawing his back, she began to bite his neck. The pain of her teeth didn't stop him from pushing his manhood into her deeper and deeper. Everything was going just as I had planned. However, something was missing. Something was taking away from the absolute pleasure they could experience. I searched their souls and bodies. They were both clean. "Tell him," I whispered to her. He released her legs, and she wrapped them around him. "Ask her," I whispered to him. My influence penetrated their minds as their desire surrendered to my will. Elizabeth pushed him out and wrapped her hand around his cock. Her inner thighs were shivering. "Do it, Elizabeth." They locked eyes as she removed the condom. Tightening her legs, she pushed him back inside. They both gasped in pleasure as the feeling increased to new heights. The sensation of skin on skin forced them to moan in carnality. She could feel every vein of his throbbing cock. He pressed his body on top of hers and pushed in deeper, slowly and gently. As he sank into her, he gripped her backside and squeezed it firmly. It was all too much to take. No longer could the couple hold out. The climax was beckoning. Andrew's stroke sped up as she clawed his back again, harder. She broke the skin with her nails, but he couldn't care less. All that mattered was the feeling of being inside her warm, wet body. The deeper he pushed, the tighter her legs clasped around him. Elizabeth wasn't about to let him go. He knew it, as did I. Their passion was feeding me to a new plane of pleasure, something I much enjoyed. Andrew's subtle strokes had soon become long and powerful thrusts. The sound of skin slapping against skin could have been heard in the hallway if a passerby had stopped to notice. She caressed his back and moved her hands to his firm, muscled ass. Clutching his cheeks, she held him in for a long moment. "I'm gonna come, Elizabeth," he shouted. Closing her eyes, she released his cheeks, but kept her legs wrapped around him. Sweat covered their bodies, and the heat made the scent of sex more potent. He held the back of her head and sucked the side of her neck. She tasted delicious on his soft pink tongue. The intervals of his strokes shortened, and he was about to explode. I wanted them to come together. They needed to come together. "Elizabeth, are you on the pill?" he panted.
"No, and I want you to come in me,"
she responded before grabbing his ass again. "Oh my fucking God," he whispered. His strokes increased in speed. The fact that she wasn't on birth control turned him on. They both loved risky sex. That was one of many reasons they would make a good couple, and one of the reasons why I chose them. They both wanted this.
"I'm coming, Andrew. Don't stop fucking me,"
she exclaimed. Andrew slammed his cock inside of her with relentless force. She was squirting all over him. They were about to come, together. Silence now. They both knew it was going to happen. And when it did, my power would be rejuvenated. Elizabeth locked him in with her legs, and Andrew gave no resistance. He would come deep inside of her, and she would savor the moment. They were engaged in the best sex of their lives, and the euphoria in the air served to heighten the lust between them. Pushing his cock as deep as he could, he released his seed inside of her as she screamed in climax, her soft, plush pussy enveloping his cock. Out of breath and gasping, they both laid there, shivering. I closed my eyes and breathed in their passion. All was done. My mission had been fulfilled. He rolled off her as they laughed in bliss. Turning on her side, she put one leg over him and caressed his head. That was amazing. I'm never letting you go, he said.
You'd better not,
she smiled. I grinned and ascended from his room, then floated above the building. Another couple had been joined, and I, Sylas Diya, the Seraph of love and desire, would be made powerful once again. The golden aura around my body shone bright as I vanished into the realm where I would store my power. The only one who resisted me in my millennia of existence would be my next conquest. Anaya Myers was her name, and I vowed to someday claim her. For now, I would continue to study her emotions until I found a weakness I could exploit. Her desire would be mine to collect in due time.
Chapter 3. Anaya. The week was grueling. I had so much on my plate and so much reading to do. I wasn't sure how I was going to find time for myself. Saya started school yesterday, and I didn't envy her. We were both going to be overloaded with studies soon. My friend Elizabeth had been hassling me about meeting up for coffee for the last 2 weeks. Sometime last month, she'd proclaimed to have found her soulmate. I'd been single for the last 2 years, and listening to her relish in her newfound love was the last thing I wanted to do. I wasn't bitter or jealous. Well, maybe I was a little. But I needed to focus on my studies. That would become the focal point of my life until I was a licensed psychologist. Asshole, Saya murmured as she entered the house. She threw her bag to the floor in the hallway and flopped onto the couch in the living room. I could tell she was exhausted. Rough day? I asked, sitting next to her. She put her feet on my lap so I could remove her shoes. Why she chose to wear those leather high heels to school was beyond me. I took them off and threw them into the corner. I think Professor Williamson has it out for me, she complained. How so? I moved over and placed a pillow under her feet. He teaches my contracts course. He keeps smacking me down every time I have an opinion or try to make an argument. I got up and went into the kitchen to grab her and myself some green tea. That always seemed to calm us down after school. I'm sure he's just picking your brain, Saya. Some professors enjoy it when their students challenge their theories. Don't let him get you down. 3 years from now, after you pass the bar exam, you'll be a lawyer. Focus on that. Tea in hand, I sat on the chair adjacent to the couch, and then I put her glass on the table along with mine. She reached for the cup, took a sip, and sighed.
just as long as I survive this contracts class. I sipped my tea and turned on the television. You'll survive, Saya. Don't worry. I smiled. Listening to her complain about her day gave me comfort that I wasn't the only one stressed with schoolwork. As they said, misery loves company. How was your day? Meet any cute guys? She asked. I scoffed at her. Men were the last thing on my mind, least of all any at our school. I'm not looking at the moment. She could sense the attitude in my voice, but that didn't stop her. You've been single for how many years? She commented. I rolled my eyes and kept my attention on the evening news. Worry about your own love life. Your legs have been closed for so long, I'm surprised the cells on your skin haven't fused. She gasped and stared at me, shocked. I tried to hide my smile. How dare you? You do not want to compare our sex lives, because I can go all night, Mother Teresa. I set my glass on the table and faced her. Mother Teresa? I could get a man if I wanted to, Saya. I'm just focusing on my studies, and I'm too busy for relationships right now. She snickered. I've heard that excuse for the last 4.5 years. What you need is one passionate, steamy night of mind-blowing sex to put you at ease. You seem too wound up. We should go out tomorrow night. Meet some new people. You want to? She stared at me as I shook my head and took another sip of tea. I don't know. I have a lot of reading to do. Oh, come on, Anaya. I'm pretty sure I have a ton more reading than you do. One night won't kill you. Let's go out, she pressed. I sighed again. Fine. Just don't pressure me into getting drunk like last time. I don't want to wake up with a hangover Sunday morning. I plan on devoting my time to studying that day. She raised her right hand and smiled. I promise. I gave her a suspicious glare and finished my tea. The last time she'd promised me that, I'd ended up doing the walk of shame in Reston Town Center, past the large fountain that many in the area frequent. I didn't even know how the hell I'd gotten there. Fortunately, it'd been an early Sunday morning, and there hadn't been that many people around. I never understood how I'd gotten from a nightclub in D.C. to the town center in Reston. That was 2 years ago, however. And since then, I'd vowed never to drink that much again. Saya had been nowhere to be found, and my friends had all left with the guys they'd hooked up with. Luckily, I hadn't been abducted or something. I could have done without the Uber driver's judgment glances, however. You'd better be sure to keep your promise. I don't want to end up abandoned like last time, I said. She chuckled. You're not still upset about that whole Reston thing, are you? That was years ago. I said I was sorry. We all thought Brandon took you home. I gritted my teeth as the whole event replayed in my mind. You knew damn well Brandon wanted to go to the Green Lantern. That was the only gay bar close by. He told us about it before we even decided where we wanted to go. Anyway, don't pressure me into drinking much. I want to be functional on Sunday. All right, I promise, she said again. I stared at her for a few more seconds before I began flipping through the channels. I'd been reluctant to go out with her ever since that incident. Either way, I supposed it would do me good to have a bit of fun. It would help in getting my mind off my studies for a while. And those dreams I've been having. Saya went into the kitchen with her now empty glass. She picked up mine as well. We still have some sweet and sour chicken left over from P.F. Chang's. You want some? I found a movie and set the remote on the table. Sure, I said, before someone knocked on our door. I got up and looked through the peephole. Couldn't believe it. Who is it? Asked Saya. It's Elizabeth, I growled. I can see you looking through the peephole. Let me in, I come bearing gifts, Elizabeth said.
What's wrong? Let her in, Saya said nonchalantly. I knew the second I opened the door, she would bombard us with tales of her latest romance. That was something I didn't want to hear. I opened the door, and in her hands was an assortment of cupcakes from Cupcakes Actually, one of my favorite bakeries. She also had 3 lattes from Starbucks. All the necessities for a long night of girl talk. Took you long enough. Elizabeth handed me the cups of coffee. I held the door open for her, and she set the box of cupcakes on the sofa. Are you making Chinese food? She asked, sniffing the air. I'm just heating up some sweet and sour chicken from yesterday. You want any? Asked Saya. I shook my head covertly in Saya's direction, but it was too late. Of course! Where's it from? Elizabeth asked. P.F. Chang's, I said woefully. I love that place! We can have dessert first if you don't mind. She sat on the couch and moved the box of cupcakes onto the table in front of us. Saya came back into the living room with a large plate of white rice and containers full of sweet and sour chicken. Elizabeth had already taken a bite of a chocolate cupcake with white icing. You two aren't going to believe what happened to me, she said with icing on the corner of her mouth. I rolled my eyes. The last thing I wanted to hear about was one of her flings. Or perhaps she slept with some random to get back at her boyfriend. Did you finally break up with David? Saya asked. I took one of the 3 plastic containers of chicken and put rice into it. I hope you did. I told you 2 weeks ago that he was sleeping with Ariel. She bit into her cupcake again and washed it down with her latte. Yes, I finally broke up with him, but that's not what I want to talk about. I met someone new. He's amazing. A glint of sincerity and joy shined in her eyes. Perhaps I'd misjudged her. Maybe this new relationship of hers wasn't just some fling. Are you sure this isn't lust at first sight that turned into the relationship that never should have been? Like David? Asked Saya. We both looked at Elizabeth suspiciously. She'd met David in a bar, and he was hitting on another woman right in front of her before he turned his attention to her. I had no idea why she always went for the scum of the male species. Elizabeth attracted them like moths to a flame. Whoever this new guy was, I hoped she at least waited for a few dates before sleeping with him. This isn't like David at all, you guys. We've been together every day since we met. I don't know what it is about him, but I think I'm falling in love. Saya and I looked at each other dismissively. I shook my head and began to eat my meal. That's funny. You said the same thing about David, Saya mocked. I'm serious this time. No matter how much of a bitch I was to this guy, he wouldn't give up. We met at a coffee shop in D.C. He didn't give off a player vibe, but he was extremely confident when he talked to me. It was as if he was willing us together. I can't explain it. It was so different. Chewing, I gazed at Elizabeth and smirked. Well, at least you didn't meet him at a bar. Like, you know, David. She threw us a cross glance. Would you two stop bringing up David, for crap's sake? I'm over him. This isn't going to be like my last relationship. Anyway, I can't wait for you two to meet him. He works at the World Bank, and he has these beautiful hazel eyes. They're almost hypnotic. I handed Elizabeth a napkin so she could wipe the icing from the corner of her lip. I didn't think I would ever understand why she gave her whole heart to a man from the very start of a relationship. I just hoped this wouldn't blow up in her face as her last relationship did. I reached for one of the lattes she'd brought and placed it beside me. I'd save it for later. Coffee and Chinese food weren't a good mix for me. Saya changed the channel on the television in an attempt to something good we could watch. The excitement in Elizabeth's eyes told me she had fallen deeply in love with whoever this guy was. If this man burned her as David had done, I'd be the one who'd have to listen to her sobs at all hours of the night. Nevertheless, for the time being, I guessed I should be happy for her. In her channel surfing, Saya landed on a 1970s horror movie and threw the remote onto the couch. She finished her food and moved her plate off to the side so she could reach for one of the cupcakes. There were only 3 left.
"I thought these were for us," said Saya. "Sorry, but I haven't eaten all day," said Elizabeth, licking her fingers.
"That's why we warmed up some of this Chinese food for you. No more cupcakes." I moved the box away from her and grabbed one for myself. "So, when do we meet this guy?"
Elizabeth turned her attention to the television and jumped a little, startled. "Can we watch something else? I don't want to see people slashed to death by an invincible killer with a knife."
I took the remote off the couch and tossed it to her. "Change it to whatever you like." Saya, having finished her food, took the dishes back into the kitchen and placed them in the sink. Elizabeth was avoiding eye contact with me after I'd given her the remote.
"You know, Elizabeth,"
Saya said as she placed the dishes in the sink, "if you're supposedly in love with this guy, then why haven't you told us his name?
And with the exception of his eyes, you haven't even told us what he looks like. You know what? Anaya and I are going out tomorrow. Why don't you bring him along?"
Elizabeth paused, and fret entered her eyes. Something was troubling her. After finding a cozy romance movie, she set the remote on the table and began to watch.
"His name is Andrew Miles. You two will find out what he looks like someday," she said.
I glanced at Saya from the living room, and we looked at each other with confusion. "Someday?" I raised a single eyebrow as I made my inquiry. She couldn't be thinking what I believed she was.
"Yes, someday. Maybe in about a month or so," she repeated. "Elizabeth, do I sense a hint of insecurity in your voice?" said Saya.
Annoyed, she sat up on the couch and focused on the movie.
"I'm not insecure. I don't want what happened with David to happen with Andrew."
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could she even think that? Don't lump us in with Ariel. I'd never do something like that. And I'm sure Saya wouldn't either, I scolded.
"I don't know. The both of you are a lot more attractive than I am. He might see you and change his mind about me."
"Don't be ridiculous, Elizabeth," Saya said. "You just met the guy and already you're bringing your baggage from David into this relationship? You are beautiful, funny, and smart. Don't belittle yourself." She's right. Don't let what David did mess with your self-esteem. What's more, anytime we go out, a lot more guys approach you than they do me, I said. Elizabeth put her head down as our words soaked into her. "And if you ever liken me to Ariel again, I'll have no choice but to fight you," Saya joked. Elizabeth laughed, as did I.
"All right, we'll go out with you tomorrow night. I just don't want to mess this one up. I feel Andrew isn't like the other guys I've been with."
Saya shook her head. "You're just overprotective. Word of advice, guys hate that sort of thing. Come out and enjoy a night with us. I'm sure Anaya will appreciate it, since she can't seem to let go of that Rustin incident." Elizabeth smirked at me. "You're still hung up on that?" I sighed. "We'll be in our 80s, and I'll still bring it up. I'm never letting that one go." They laughed as I sat there rolling my eyes with my arms crossed. Turning my attention to the cupcake I'd saved for myself, I removed the liner and bit into it. The ganache-dipped chocolate flavor made my taste buds tingle. It was like biting into paradise. Letting her in was a good idea after all. I reached for my latte as Saya came back from the kitchen and sat next to me. "So,
How many dates did you go on before sleeping with him? Or are you still holding out? She asked. Jolting, Elizabeth turned her eyes away from us. Right then, we knew. You slept with him on the first date, didn't you? I asked. She finished her latte and looked down at her lap. Yes, she murmured. Elizabeth, Saya scoffed. It wasn't like it was planned or anything. I just went to his place for a drink, and one thing led to another, and, well, you know. What about the rules? I said. I thought we made a pact never to fuck on the first date. Men tend to develop this idiotic thought process that women who put out on the first date are easy. Elizabeth leaned forward on the couch and took Saya's cup of tea, which she hadn't yet finished. Saya didn't protest, however, as she did have a latte in front of her. This is different. He's different. When we made love, it was as if something was calling to us. Everything about that night was amazing. I'm just lucky I didn't get pregnant. The second those words escaped her lips, Elizabeth covered her mouth with wide-eyed shock. Saya and I both stared at her in disbelief. I could only guess that she let that last sentence slip out by accident. What do you mean you're lucky you didn't get pregnant? Asked Saya. I'm on birth control now, don't worry. Were you not on the pill the first time you slept with him? I threw her a tense glare. I told you, I didn't plan on this happening. When you have a connection with someone, things just happen. Anyway, don't worry about it. You'll meet him tomorrow night, and when you do, you can scrutinize him all you like. Just don't scare him away. Saya and I continued to look at her with concern. I, more than anyone, didn't want to see her hurt again. If she put this much emotion into a relationship so fast, then who knew how far she'd crumble if it didn't work out? Well, you said he has cute eyes. What about the rest of him? Asked Saya. Elizabeth sank into the couch and exhaled slowly. She closed her eyes and smiled. He's tall, dark, and bald. Sizable muscles with a delicious six-pack. He works as a personal trainer in his spare time. We've been to the gym together, a lot. Even though he tells me continuously that he likes me the way I am, I feel as though I could lose a few pounds. He's helping me with that. I snickered. It was as if the man of her dreams had just fallen into her lap. I had to see this guy for myself. He couldn't be a lawyer, a personal trainer, and a nice guy. Those three things just didn't mix. Does he have a big dick? Asked Saya casually. What the hell kind of question is that? I'm pretty sure that's none of our business. I shot at her. Don't be a prude, Anaya. Just because a special someone hasn't been laid in a while doesn't mean we can't talk about it. This woman never ceased to amaze. Whatever, I don't think we need to know the size of her boyfriend's cock, Saya. It's huge! Exclaimed Elizabeth, much to my surprise. The first time we made love, I didn't know if I was going to be able to take it all. But anyway, that's enough about that. I don't want either of you to get any ideas. I shook my head and turned my attention to the television. Maybe I was becoming a prude. I didn't care to hear about Elizabeth's sex life, and perhaps it was because mine was non-existent. Envy wasn't something I handled well. The only excitement I was getting was in dreams, and that was sad, for me at least. This was precisely why I didn't want to hear about our new relationship. Now I was feeling inadequate and a bit jealous. Saya was right. I needed to go out and meet people. I just hoped tomorrow night wouldn't end like the Rustin incident. If that were to happen to me again, I'd kill them both. I'm glad you found someone to make you happy. I can't wait to meet him, said Saya.
fun and meeting people aside, I had a whole night of studying ahead of me, and I needed to focus. I went upstairs before making a detour to the closet, where my books and laptop were stuffed in my bag.
Leaving so soon?
Asked Elizabeth. Yes, I have a lot of reading to catch up on. Thanks for the one cupcake, I said sarcastically.
I'll bring more next time,
she said as I made my way to my room. The pile of articles I had to read would keep me up all night. For the first time, I was hoping to have one of those sensual dreams. I needed some form of relief, and those dreams were doing the trick quite nicely, as long as I kept them under control. Chapter 4. Sylas. "Careful what you wish for," I whispered as she fell into slumber. Anaya hadn't taken off her glasses before she closed her eyes and rested her head on the pages of the textbook she was reading. I was always there, watching, waiting, gaining insight into her psyche to figure out what made her tick. I entered her dream as always and laid the playing field of what would become my salvation. "Who are you?" she asked. The golden aura that surrounded my body fluttered the moment the question escaped her lips. She was awake in the dream before I could create a reality for it. "How could you have known my presence before entering REM sleep?" I asked. Anaya stretched her arms and sat up from her bed. The book and pillows she lay on vanished into a mist of small white butterflies and fog. She had known me, sensed me. It was something that had never happened before. "Is this another dream?" She gazed at her surroundings and was mesmerized. I had changed her perception of what she believed was before her. "What is this?" she asked, eyes gleaming. Despite the nature of her question, she wasn't aware, though pertinent to her reasoning, that the real reason for her being here wasn't to take in the sights. I needed the energy to survive, since I'd been stripped of my powers. The essence of love and lust intertwined would be my ticket back to the Omni's universe. The afterlife beckoned me, and I would fulfill its calling through her. Through Anaya Myers, the one who could not love or feel desire of her own. My curse would be lifted. She was the key, my conquest. "Why do you keep bringing me here? Are you real or a figment of my imagination?" She continued to inquire. Her hazel eyes were formidable. They frightened me. I, Sylas Diya, was afraid of what she could make me feel. I needed to cast my feelings aside and focus on my objective. Her heart would belong to another, and I would wield that outcome. By my hand, I would influence a desire that would birth a love within her. And with that, she would fall for another. It was the only way. "Are you going to answer me or just stand there staring into the sky like a crazy person?" I turned to her and smiled. "What answers do you require of me?" "I want to know who you are." "Does that even matter? I am here because I need to be. You are here because I need you to be." She approached me and placed her soft, warm hand on my bare chest. Her touch caused my skin to blush. The golden aura I emitted strengthened to a blinding light. Anaya, my savior, had no other choice but to shield her eyes from it. "Who are you?" she asked again, backing away.
It isn't who I am, it's what I am.
And what are you?
I allowed my aura to fade enough so that she could focus her eyes on mine. Taking a step closer, I extended my hand to her bosom. My eyes lit up gold and white, which threw her into a trance. I knew just then she was the one. You believe your reality is the measurement for all existence. You believe you think, therefore you are. In truth, it is this: I think, therefore we are. I was once a part of something well beyond your comprehension. One human, one seraph, and one vampire. We are called Rule of Three. Through you, I will earn my return back into the heart of the Omni. The Omni, in all its incomprehensible glory, thinks. Therefore, we are. My power was hypnotizing, yet Anaya was still able to resist and backed away slowly. She was truly special. Which one were you in this Rule of Three? I smiled and advanced toward her at the same pace as her retreat. The Seraph, the most powerful of the three.
So you're saying angels and vampires coexist?
Not vampires. Vampires. You must emphasize the V and the vowels. And to answer your question, yes, humans, vampires, seraphs, and a host of other species throughout the multiverse coexist. I, however, am cursed. Anaya ceased her withdrawal and stood before me, having understood what I indeed was. I reached for her and ran my glittering hand through her auburn hair. She smelled of roses and strawberries. It almost made my heart skip. How was this possible? I couldn't understand it.
How are you cursed?
Her voice quivered. I was cast out of paradise for interfering with the free will of the humans in this world. She placed her hand on top of mine as I continued to stroke her hair. Closing her eyes, she breathed in my scent. I could feel her heart beating, the essence of her soul traveling through the ambient clouds of bliss where we now dwelled. This was the first time I'd ever felt something this potent from a mere human. An ocean of pleasures to come existed in her eyes.
This is the wildest set of dreams I've ever had in my life. I could probably integrate this experience into my dissertation when I graduate.
I pulled my hand away and gazed at her for a moment. My duty was to challenge her both physically and emotionally. If she continued to believe all this to be a dream, then it would only delay her shock when I revealed myself to her in the real world. Just then, our positions switched. I found myself retreating while she advanced. Every step back I took, she moved forward. I saw it in her eyes. This beautiful star of mine craved more information. However, that was something I could not yet relinquish. I needed to study her a bit longer before I could take it to the next level. Anaya would need to be tested, just as her friend Elizabeth had been. This was something I couldn't lose sight of. Not yet, anyway.
Why did you stop last time? She asked.
What do you mean?
That was you, wasn't it? The entity who wanted to bury his tongue between my thighs?
Yes, that was me.
So why'd you stop? It seemed you have the power to take whatever you want.
She continued to advance. Her scent was becoming too much for me to bear. I needed to taste her. But would she give me permission? Was the question I asked myself. I stopped because it was your wish. Would you rather me continue, even after you told me no? The ground beneath our feet shook, the sky shed its clouds, and the starlit night became clear. We were surrounded by twilight, a scene I loved to gaze upon. Anaya was fully immersed in REM sleep, which allowed me to alter her reality as I saw fit. There was no atmosphere between the stars and us, yet the air we breathed was plentiful as it needed to be. The only light that shone down on us came from the various moons and their rings, reflecting off the nearest star we orbited. Magical was too light a word to describe the scenery. Gawking, Anaya stopped to marvel at the view I had created for her. She was mesmerized. I wanted to put her mind at ease so I could enter her subconscious and find the reason she was so unwilling to give her heart to another.
Are you doing this?
She asked, wide-eyed. I extended my hand to her face and caressed the bottom of her chin with the tips of my fingers. No, my little angel, you are. Euphoria engulfed her as sweat dripped from her body. I wanted to hold my tongue out and catch each droplet before it hit the ground. She was so beautiful to me, more so than any mortal woman in my infinite time of existence.
This is amazing. Everything about this feels so real.
I nodded and smiled. Who's to say this isn't real? She continued to gaze at the sky. Soon, the twilight faded to become darkness and shining stars. All of it was for her. She needed this just as much as I did. The clothes she wore caught fire, engulfing her body in a heat that rivaled my burning desire for her. Like a fairy glowing in a dark forest, her body was submerged by fire, the flames transforming her.
What's happening?
She stuttered. The fire dwindled as she lifted her arms to the sky. Green and yellow embers glittered from her legs to her torso, and I decided I would create for her an attire best suited to a moment such as this. The fire morphed into a beautiful nightgown. It hugged every curve of her voluptuous body as I'd hoped it would. Her hair draped down her back, glowing auburn like a firefly in the night. The twinkle in her eyes was one of amazement. She looked herself up and down and right to left.
I can't believe this. It's beautiful.
She continued to admire her new clothes. The sweat from her body tainted the silk fabric, exposing her nipples. My mouth watered.
I feel something inside. It's making me
nervous, anxious, titillated.
Yes.
Good. Allow the feeling to flow through you. Let it consume you. She dropped to her knees and looked up at me, shaking.
To what end?
Excuse me?
Why are you doing this to me? Why do you keep bringing me here? What exactly is it that you want from me?
I took a knee and stared into her eyes. With my index finger, I rubbed the bottom of her chin.
What?
She stuttered before I pierced her mind with my thoughts, my wishes, my objectives. Tears streamed down her flushed cheeks as she took it all in. In all its ethereal beauty, visions of the Omni's universe, which was home to the vampires and angels and every other known species in the cosmos, entered her mind with the delicate touch of a butterfly. The sensation may have been too much for her. Nevertheless, it was something that had to be done.
Beautiful. It's all so beautiful. How could such a place exist?
She whispered. Gaping, she exhaled her breath into my mouth. I closed my eyes and allowed it to fill my immortal lungs. It was then I saw everything about this charming woman. Her past, her thoughts, everything. I knew the reason now, well enough to say she was the one.
I want to be there. Take me to this place,
she pleaded. In due time, I assured her.
When would that be?
Her eyes grew impatient. In time, I reiterated. Lifting her with my finger, I allowed my power to consume her. She was beginning to understand. I saw it on her face.
You need me to get back into this place?
For that, and so much more.
How am I supposed to help you do that?
As I've said before, Anaya, all will be revealed in due time. For now, let us enjoy our time together. I want to hear from your own lips what your thoughts have told me. I removed my finger from underneath her chin, and she took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I took a few steps back so I could examine her body, the way her chest moved when she breathed, her heart rate, as well as the blush of her skin. I didn't want to overwhelm her with too much sensation.
What have my thoughts told you?
She asked. I'm sure you're already aware.
Then why do you need to hear aloud what you already know?
We gazed at each other for a moment. She was indeed a feisty woman. Because, Anaya, hearing the words escape your lips has a much deeper impact, as opposed to your thoughts unwillingly giving me that information. And I believe you were stalling.
Stalling?
Yes. You're afraid to confide in me your secret. Are you ashamed? She rolled her eyes.
Maybe I don't want to talk about it.
I took her hand and pulled her closer. Now is not the time to be coy. I will keep you here for as long as I must.
So I'm to be your prisoner?
We are all our own prisoners. What matters is when we choose to release ourselves from that prison. It could take a lifetime or a day. The choice is ours. She pulled her hand away and turned her back toward me.
So I'm your prisoner until I tell you my secrets?
No, not me, Anaya. Confess to yourself why you refuse to let yourself fall in love. Face your own truth. Only then will you be free from the prison you've created for yourself. I disappeared into a puff of gold smoke, only to reappear in front of her. Gasping, she took a step back. Her body began to tremble. She was nervous, just as much as she was intrigued.
Why are you doing this to me?
You are doing this to yourself. I am merely the catalyst.
If I sleep with you, will you leave me alone?
Her eyes were sincere. Whether you choose to sleep with me or not is up to you. Just know that you and I are connected for all time. Nothing can keep us apart. So, I'm afraid I'll never be able to leave you alone. I was growing restless with her stalling.
But why?
Enough, Anaya, I exclaimed. The ground shook and the sky turned to blue fire. The stars vanished as she looked around in a panic.
What are you doing?
She said, before the ground opened beneath her feet. She began to fall slowly, like a feather. I followed, hovering above her, taking on my angelic form. My eyes and body radiated a heavenly gold glow. Time was running out, and I needed her to tell me the reason she hid from the world. Anaya, I whispered. I reached for her delicate face. The clothes I'd given her faded to dust, exposing her deliciously voluptuous body. We were both falling, nude, into a realm of dimness that I alone controlled. Looking at her beauty was forcing my self-control to fade. I wanted to make love to her, to feel her warm legs wrapped around my body would be a gift I didn't deserve. Nevertheless, I needed to feel that sensation. I needed to explore all of her. I didn't care if it was forbidden.
What's happening? Why are we falling so slowly?
Her voice was like an echo in this lustrous void. I need you to tell me, Anaya, I demanded. Throwing me a half smile, she extended her arms toward me. I was reluctant to reciprocate.
Make love to me, and I'll tell you anything you wish to know. I've never been with a Seraph before.
I grabbed her hands, pulled her in, and embraced her soft, frail body. Do you think this is a game? I scolded.
Isn't everything?
She wrapped her legs around me. Just then, the void we were in lit up like the sun. Shimmering particles and dust circled us like fireflies at a campfire. This woman was determined to strip my control from me.
I haven't had a wet dream in years.
She went in for the kiss, but I pulled away. Is this what you want?
Yes. I refused you before, but now I welcome you. If I'm not getting any in real life, I might as well get some in my dreams.
She'd trapped me. I never suspected that she would want me. If I gave her what she wanted, my feelings for her could grow out of my control. It seemed as if my teasing had reached a level I never thought it would. She thrust her hips against my torso, and the sweat of her body dripped all over me. As she examined my eyes and facial expression, her brow wrinkled.
I thought you wanted this, she asked, confused.
I do, trust me. I do. But something... I don't know. I can't explain it. My cock was throbbing, pressed against her stomach. With one small movement, I'd be deep inside of her hot, wanting body.
Whatever it is, you can explain it to me later. I want you inside of me.
As we continued to float, She maneuvered herself around, flipping us over. I was now on the bottom, while she gazed at my muscular, glowing body from on top of me. She grabbed my cock in her warm, sweaty hand. This woman was ready and willing to give what she was so adamant about protecting last time. Before we do this, you need to tell me. I must hear it from your lips. Ignoring me, she stroked my cock with her hand. The sweat from our bodies produced all the lubricant we needed.
After,
she whispered. Moving her body upward, she placed the tip of my cock on her dripping wet pussy. Just as she readied herself to insert my cock, she vanished in a puff of smoke. Gone, no warning, and without a trace. I continued to float in midair, body soaked and hot, cock throbbing. I was alone in an endless void with my thoughts of her. We'd almost made the ultimate mistake. I would never allow it to get that far again. I needed to maintain self-control until the time was right. My feelings for her couldn't interfere with my mission. That I promised myself.
Chapter 5. Anaya. Anaya, wake up! You hear me? It's time for you to wake up. Groggy, I opened my eyes and saw Saya standing over me with a cup of hot tea, shaking my shoulder. You've been sleeping all day, she said. I took off my glasses and looked at the time. It was 6 p.m. I'd almost slept a full 24 hours. Holy shit, Saya! Why didn't you wake me? I exclaimed. I couldn't believe I'd slept my entire Saturday away. You looked like you needed the rest. You were moaning and whispering gibberish the whole time. I didn't want to disturb you. I have to say, though, that was the first time I've ever heard you talking in your sleep. I gritted my teeth and glared daggers at her before I rushed to the bathroom. These dreams were beginning to consume my life. Even though I'd slept so damn long, she couldn't have interrupted my sleep at a worse time. Whenever I dreamed of sex, someone or something woke me before the actual sex could take place. It was so frustrating when that happened. Are you still coming out with us tonight? Or would you rather get something to eat first? I splashed myself in the face with water from the sink and wiped my eyes. My stomach was growling since I hadn't eaten all day. Elizabeth and her new boyfriend are still coming, right? Yes, they're gonna meet us there. What time are we planning on meeting with them? Around 9 or 10 o'clock. You want to get something to eat before then? I know you're probably hungry. I was indeed hungry, but I needed to take a shower first. There was plenty of time before we had to meet up with them, and I still felt it necessary to process that damn dream. I had no idea who that guy was, but something was telling me that there was more to this. Every night for weeks, I had the same dream featuring this angel or Seraph. This shit was starting to get weird. I'd never slept so long in my life. If these dreams were real and this angelic being was trying to enter my life through my subconscious, then this could prove to be a significant breakthrough in the field of psychoanalysis. My professors would probably flip if they heard me say that. Most of them didn't take too kindly of Sigmund Freud's theories. Still, I had to figure out exactly what this guy wanted. I damn sure didn't want to sleep that long again. The grip he had on me must end. For the sake of my sanity, if anything. What do you want to eat? Saya shouted from downstairs. I had already shed my clothes and climbed into the shower, so her voice was a bit muffled. You choose. Doesn't matter to me. That was when I heard a man's voice. It was coming from downstairs. I also heard Elizabeth. Did she bring her boyfriend here? I hurried and finished my shower. I turned the water off so I could make out the voices a little better. 2 men and Elizabeth were in our house.
"Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" said Saya. "I wanted to surprise you. This is Andrew, my boyfriend, and his friend, Marquise. We thought that maybe we could have dinner before we head out on the town. Is that fine with you?" said Elizabeth. I was standing in the doorway of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, listening to their conversation. This woman was starting to get on my nerves with her unannounced visits. "Where's Anaya?"
said Elizabeth.
"She's taking a shower. We weren't expecting you to show up like this. We're still getting ready," said Saya. "You want us to come back later?" "No, you're already here, so it's fine. Make yourselves at home. We'll be ready soon. There's some drinks in the fridge if you want."
I closed the bathroom door and headed toward my room. Now I had to hurry and get ready since she'd decided to come so early. "Do you have a restroom I could use?" one of the men said.
"Yes, upstairs on the right," said Saya.
Oh my God, what the hell was wrong with her? She knew I was still up here. I rushed to my room and closed the door quickly. I listened as the man trotted up the stairs. He took a deep breath and then exhaled slowly. I love the smell of a fresh, steamy bathroom, recently occupied by a woman. He whispered to himself. I hoped that wasn't Elizabeth's boyfriend out there. Kind of a creepy thing to say. I ignored whatever else he mumbled to himself and began to dry off. Saya had already laid out some clothes for me to wear. I'd told her to stop doing that in the past. She enjoyed dressing me as if I were her daughter or something. She'd done that since we were in high school. Either way, I was in a hurry, and it didn't really matter what I wore. I hadn't planned to dress to impress anyone. After tossing my towel on the bed, I started to blow dry my hair. The dress Saya had plucked from my closet was one of my favorites. It was black, and it had kimono sleeves with a blouse and silhouette, and a banded bottom. I liked the off-shoulder style trend of the dress. Some may disagree, but I thought the style was reasonably comfortable. It may have been a little too sexy, and I didn't want to give off the wrong impression, especially with that bathroom sniffer out there. As I finished drying my hair and sat in front of my dressing table to put on my makeup, I heard someone tugging at my doorknob.
"Anaya, are you in there? Open up the door,"
said Elizabeth. What did she want? I stood up, headed over to the door, and unlocked it. It's open. Before I could make it back to my table, the door swung open, revealing my half-naked body to the bathroom sniffer. Wow, your friend's hot, he said, licking his lips. His eyes and the smug grin on his face were deviant. I pushed Elizabeth out of the way and slammed the door shut. I heard him chuckle before he went back downstairs. Could this woman be any more careless?
"I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were still undressed."
Elizabeth, I sighed heavily. What is it you want? I'm trying to get ready so we can leave. I sat back down to finish my makeup. She sat on the bed and held the dress I was planning to wear up to her chest.
"This is cute. Can I borrow it sometime?"
Absolutely not. Don't you have a similar dress?
"Yes, but it's not black like this one."
She placed the dress back on the bed. I suggest you buy your own. Anyway, that guy out there, who was that? Your boyfriend or that Marquise guy?
"That's Marquise. He's cute, don't you think?"
Yes, he's cute in that I'll fuck you once and never speak to you again sort of way. Elizabeth laughed, as if I weren't serious.
"Lighten up, Anaya. He's a good guy. I trust Andrew wouldn't hang around man-whores."
And now, thanks to you, he's probably gonna try all night to fuck me, since he's already seen me in my bra and panties. She snickered.
"Explain to me how that's a bad thing."
I turned to her and threw her an evil glare before she burst out laughing.
I will cut you, Elizabeth. Is that what you want? You want to be cut? I threatened, waving my makeup brush in the air as a weapon.
Come on, Anaya. When's the last time you got any?
She held her hand out.
Months. Let's see.
And she began to count the fingers on her right hand as she named each month on the calendar. I threw up a bald piece of paper at her forehead to get her to stop. She smiled. So you're gonna make fun of me too?
I'm just saying.
When I'm ready to be with someone, I'll probably let you know about it. But it won't be tonight. And it certainly won't be with the bathroom sniffer out there. Elizabeth's brow curled and she laughed.
The bathroom, what?
Nothing. Never mind. Anyway, why are you in here? Can't a woman get ready in peace? She stood up, walked over to the door, and pressed her ear against it. I gave her a strange look. She'd become peculiar since finding her new boyfriend. Well, more so than she usually was.
I think he's gone,
she said. I shook my head. It was then I knew what she was plotting. I, however, didn't want any part of it.
So I was thinking.
I know what you're thinking. I cut her off. And the answer is no. She sat back on the bed and crossed her legs.
You didn't even know what I was about to say.
I know you, Elizabeth. You're planning to hook me up with that guy out there, aren't you? She chuckled.
Oh, so you're a mind reader now?
I scoffed and turned back around, facing my mirror to finish applying my makeup.
I showed him your profile on Facebook. He thinks you're cute,
she said. I set my makeup brush on the desk and turned to her slowly, eyes wide and mouth gaping. You did what? I growled. She gazed at me with a false impression of shock at my reaction. The nimble smile that left her lips wasn't lost on me. She was working my last nerve.
Hey, are you finished yet?
Saya said on the other side of the door. What was this? A stargazing convention hosted by me in my room? Elizabeth opened the door to let her in. Saya looked me over and put her hands on her hips. You're still not ready? What's taking so long? I exhaled an annoyed sigh and face-palmed. I would be ready if Miss Matchmaker over here would leave me in peace.
Matchmaker?
Saya inquired, confused. I hope you're not talking about Marquise. That guy's been flirting with me since he got here. I curled my lips and shook my head in Elizabeth's direction. Why, Elizabeth, I thought your boyfriend didn't hang around, man-horse, I mocked. Her eyes squinted into slits as she crossed her arms over her chest.
He doesn't,
she said, annoyed. Saya took her by the arm and snatched her off the bed. Come back downstairs with me so Anaya can get ready in peace. I want to eat before the restaurants become too packed. Elizabeth stumbled a little as Saya whisked her out of my room. Finally, I could get ready without distraction. I took comfort in that Marquise guy hitting on Saya. Whatever kept him from noticing me was welcome. After closing my door, I went back to applying my makeup. Hopefully, this time, I could finish without further interruptions. Chapter 6. Sylas. In the back of her subconscious, I watched and listened. I knew no man in her stead could break the barrier Anaya had erected around herself as I gazed into the souls of her company. I would need to find another suitor in whatever nightclub they'd choose to visit. As many times as I'd influenced humans with my power, this was the only time reluctance crept into my mind. Anything I felt for this woman had to be cast aside, though. Earning my place back into the Omni's universe and rejoining the Rule of Three was the only mission that needed my thoughts. The Rule of Three was the only reason for my existence. Without that, I was merely an empty shell. Despite the many pleasures and adventures that may lie before me, Home was where I needed to be. And Anaya would be the key to open that door. In my seraphim incorporeal form, I was but an invisible entity, non-existent, a passing breeze of air. I would sit back and watch their night unfold until the moment came for me to strike. Her group finished a light supper and ventured into the night in search of drinks, dancing, and fun. Tonight would be the night Anaya fell prey to my spell. All I needed to do was find him, that one man whom she couldn't reject. A daunting task, yet not impossible. The 5 of them hopped into a taxi, which brought them to the 18th Street Lounge. An excellent choice, if I did say so myself. With a live band and the settings hot for socializing, I'd be able to find someone for her with ease. The candlelit ambiance of this place meant that romantic partners were ripe for the picking. Soon, I would earn my way back. It was only a matter of time. Of all the nightclubs in DC, we just had to come here, said Marquise.
What's the problem? I love this place, said Saya.
I was expecting something more loud and hot, Anaya said, interrupting Marquise mid-sentence. You could say that, Marquise smirked. Anaya knew what was on his mind, as did I. He was looking to get drunk and laid, and it didn't matter with whom. For his sake, I hoped he'd keep his distance from my Anaya. My plans for her would be unchanged, and I didn't need his intrusion. I'll order us some drinks. Is there anything in particular either of you wants? Asked Andrew, digging into his pockets to fetch his wallet. Rum and coke, said Marquise.
Anaya and I will have a margarita,
said Saya, without bothering to ask her what she wanted. Andrew turned to Elizabeth and caressed her cheek with the backs of her fingers. And you, sweetheart? He asked, gazing into her eyes.
You can fetch me a frozen chocolate margarita.
She blushed at his touch and kissed his hand. Their affection put a smile on my face. I'd made a good choice in pairing those two. Elizabeth took her seat next to Saya on a soft beige couch made of suede. Marquise sat between Anaya and Saya with his arms extended behind their heads. I guess I can get used to this, he said, looking to the right and left. The place wasn't too full, but the night was still young. Every man in attendance had a female escort on their arm. I would have to wait a while longer before the fun began. The equilibrium of my influence and her desire to be mated would be tested this night. But first...
Aren't you going to help your friend buy the drinks? Asked Saya.
The 3 of them stared at Marquise as he sat there with his legs crossed. The only way I'm buying either of you a drink is if I'm guaranteed your panties in my pocket by midnight, he said. Elizabeth's face wrinkled in shock. He laughed as if it were a joke, as the 3 of them stared at him in disgust. Wow. Okay, I think I'll go over to the bar, said Anaya. Just as she was about to stand, Saya snatched her wrist and pulled her back down to sit.
You will not leave me here with this guy. At least wait until Elizabeth's boyfriend gets back with the drinks, Saya whispered. Come with me to the bar, said Anaya. And leave Elizabeth here with him? She's the one who brought him.
In their bickering, they hadn't noticed Andrew approaching from behind. He took his seat next to Elizabeth and placed his arm around her. They play some nice music here, he said, bobbing his head back and forth. Elizabeth leaned in toward her man's ear.
How well do you know this guy? She asked.
Oh, Marquise? I just met him last week. He's new to our division and doesn't have many friends. I thought I'd show him around a bit. Why? What's wrong?
Other than he's a pig, nothing much at all,
Anaya whispered, her gaze piercing as she stared at Marquise. In his ignorance, he stared back and smiled as if her prying eyes were ones of flirtation. Don't worry, you two. He's harmless, Andrew assured them. Anaya rolled her eyes as the server presented them with their drinks. She was skeptical, as she should have been. I saw into his soul, and the guile was there. He wanted meat, and his sights were focused on whoever would have him. The objective he had in mind was my Anaya. Despite that, I knew she would reject this hunter, so I didn't need to fuel or influence her will against him. Anaya would do that on her own. Well, I plan on getting shit-faced. Keep him coming, Marquise said to the server as she departed. He downed his rum and coke in 3 gulps and slammed his glass on the table in front of them. "Wanna dance?" he asked Saya as he spewed his alcohol-rich breath in her face. She rolled her eyes.
No, thank you.
I smirked. Saya uncrossed her legs and moved farther away from Marquise. She picked up her margarita and took a few sips. Anaya did the same. It was then I knew the time had come for me to take on a physical form and find a mate for my Anaya. This night would not be wasted. If I were to transcend back into the realm of the Omni and rejoin the rule of 3, then there was no other chance but now. Thus, it began.
Chapter 7. Anaya. As I sat there drinking my margarita, I closed my eyes for a moment and took in the relaxing mood surrounding me. I'd have to come here more often. The music was tremendous, not too loud, and the rooms weren't too crowded, just the way I liked it. Many of the men here already seemed to have dates, so I guessed I'd have to wait a while before anyone approached me. Either way, I wasn't in a rush to socialize. Saya and Elizabeth having dragged me out for a night of fun was as much excitement as I needed. Merely being out was comfort enough, if it satisfied them at least.
Is this seat taken?
A tall, brown-skinned man with long black hair approached us from behind. The lights were dim, but I could make out his soft brown eyes. His chin and cheekbones were well pronounced, beautiful even. He looked as if he could have been a model for Ralph Lauren or Burberry. I didn't answer right away. With my eyes wide, I sat there, stunned that this man was even talking to me.
A little overdressed, aren't you?
Marquise said to him. The man was wearing a navy blue business suit, gray tie, and white button-down shirt. I thought he looked handsome.
I just got off work. Thought I'd treat myself to some R&R before heading home, the man said. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. What time do you usually get off work?
Marquise said. The cocky attitude in his voice was apparent, and it was starting to annoy me.
My team stayed at the office later than usual. We just closed a huge account. Is that so? Well, where's the rest of your team? And why aren't you sitting with them?
Marquise mocked. Words couldn't describe just how much he was starting to piss me off. No, this seat isn't taken. Please, I interjected. One thing I couldn't stand was when people were rude to strangers for no reason at all. If I had to hear Marquise chastise this guy any longer, I was going to snap at him. The man placed his drink on the table as I made room for him to sit.
Are you sure? Your friend doesn't seem too welcoming, he whispered.
He's not my friend. I just met him tonight. You can ignore him if you want. I do. I crossed my legs as he laughed at my comment.
I didn't mean to intrude. I just saw you sitting here without a man on your arm, so I thought I'd come and introduce myself.
His breath smelled of cherries and mint. It gave me goosebumps. Looking into his eyes, I noticed the calm in them. However, there was a storm beneath his gaze that reminded me of something. Or someone. I couldn't quite measure it. Whatever it was, I had all night to piece it together. Don't worry, you're not intruding. In fact, you're going to be a good distraction. I finished my margarita and set the glass on the table next to his.
So, that's all I'm going to be to you? A distraction?
He smirked. I hadn't even realized how my words sounded until he pointed that out. I didn't mean it that way, I said in an attempt to subvert my dismissiveness. I glanced over at Marquise, and he was staring daggers at me. I ignored him and focused my attention back on this man who had yet to give me his name.
I'm joking. Don't be so serious.
He smiled. The familiarity of his creased lips as they formed the smile on his face made something thump in the back of my mind. I thought I was going crazy. He reminded me of the man from my dreams. The alcohol in that margarita must have been a bit too strong.
So, are you going to tell me your name?
He said as a powerful statement, and not as a polite question. The forcefulness in his tone was riveting. Yet another attribute from the man in my dreams. It's Anaya. And you are? I extended my palm toward him for a handshake.
Amin Kadoti. I'm originally from Michigan, but I came here because I got a job offer from a financial firm in D.C.
Instead of shaking my hand, he took mine in his and kissed my knuckles. Despite that, I was too focused on what he just said. His name stunned me. I should have known, given his features. Are you Ojibwe? I asked. The look of surprise on his face was amusing to me. I suppose he didn't figure too many people living outside of the Midwest would know about the Ojibwe tribes.
Yes, I am. I'm a member of the Saginaw Chippewa tribal nation. I grew up near Mount Pleasant in Isabella County. You're very perceptive.
He finished his drink and signaled for the server. You have to be the boldest man in this place, Elizabeth said through a wide grin. Saya and Andrew laughed along with her. Marquise, however, was shooting his stone-cold gaze directly at Amin.
What do you mean by that?
He asked, puzzled.
Well, it takes balls to approach a woman by yourself when she's among her friends, said Andrew. Particularly if you're not too sure if one of the guys sitting here with her is a boyfriend.
Amin sat back on the couch and sighed with a confident smile on his face. He wasn't the least bit rattled by my friend's comments. He seemed to welcome them. I was starting to like this guy.
I'm very observant. You see, there were a few things I noticed before coming over here. One, with the way you and the girl on your arm are so close to each other, I could tell you two were a couple. It's written all over the both of you. Anyone in this delightful establishment could tell. As for you two,
he looked straight at Saya and me.
I could tell you both were single. How's that?
Marquise interjected before downing a shot of tequila. Amin nodded and smiled directly at me.
Both of these ladies were dismissive of your advances, he said, much to our shock. Damn, not only are you bold, but blunt too, said Andrew.
Saya crossed her legs and moved in closer to Amin.
The invidious look on Marquise's face was unnerving. I wasn't sure about anyone else, but I could tell he didn't like being mocked by this stranger. Do you think this girl you just met will acquiesce to your advances any more than she did mine? Marquise leaned in and took another shot of tequila. Amin wrapped his hand around mine and caressed the backs of my fingers with his thumb. She already has, he said confidently. I tried my damnedest to keep from blushing. Who was this guy? Marquise smirked and slammed his shot glass on the table. I'm afraid you're wrong, friend. She's with me. Come on, Anaya, let's dance, he said forcefully. I sat there, dumbfounded. Excuse me? You heard me. Marquise grabbed my wrist and pulled me to my feet. Before I knew it, he'd scurried me to the dance floor, right in front of the band. What the hell do you think you're doing? I attempted to sound more pissed than I was. Asserting my dominance. I tried to pull away, but his grip on my wrist was firm. He was drunk if the tequila on his breath was any indication. I'm not in the mood for dancing right now, Marquise, I complained. What is tonight for if not dancing? He spun me around and held me close to his chest. I could feel his manhood bulging against his pants, poking me in my backside. The bathroom sniffer was getting out of control. I would appreciate it if you let me go, I said in a bitchy tone. Your mouth says no, but your ass says yes. He ground his manhood into my backside, swaying our bodies back and forth. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I tried to free myself from his grasp as subtly as I could. The more I tried, the more strong his grip got. Don't fucking make this any more difficult than it has to be, he whispered. I was taken aback. Are you insane? What the hell is wrong with you? Let me go, I said, increasing my bitchy tone. Why are you fighting? I can tell you haven't had a dick in a long time. Just let it happen. His voice became sinister. The hell with making a scene. I wanted his hands off me, now. I twisted my body and jerked myself out of his grip. Fucking psycho! I shouted, pushing him away. He laughed, as if it were a game. Sooner or later, my tongue will be buried between your thighs. Just wait and see. After looking me up and down with a cocky grin, he wandered into the crowd until I'd lost sight of him. I was going to kill Elizabeth. What kind of fiend did she unleash on me? After making sure the bastard was gone, I turned around to go back to the couch, but bumped into Amin. My face ran right into his hard, muscled chest. Are you all right? He asked with a martini in his hand. Relieved, I took the drink from him and sighed. I am now. I sipped the drink and looked over his shoulder. Saya was sitting on the couch, talking to some guy. Andrew and Elizabeth had migrated to the other side of the room, dancing. I couldn't believe they would just leave me alone with that perverted thing. I saw what happened. I'm sorry for saying this, but your boyfriend's kind of a dick, he said. I was floored that he thought Marquise was my boyfriend. That was something that needed to be clarified immediately. He's not my boyfriend. As I said before, I just met him tonight. He's fucking nuts. Yeah, I can tell, Amin said, while eyeballing the crowd to ensure he was gone. Would you like me to hang around you just in case he tries something like that again? Your friend Saya seems to be a bit preoccupied. He offered his hand. I'd like that. My so-called friends have a knack for abandoning me. We locked hands, and he led me out from the crowd and back to the couch. Saya was flirting with a mildly attractive man with blue eyes and black hair. He was wearing a leather jacket and had a well-groomed 5 o'clock shadow. As much as I didn't want to interrupt her conversation with him, I had to get something off my chest. Saya, I nudged her shoulder. She turned to me and smiled. I could tell she was a little tipsy. The man she was talking to turned his gaze to me as well.
I pulled Saya close and circled my hand over her ear. That Marquise guy's insane. I think it'd be best if neither of us left alone with him, I whispered. Saya nodded and turned her attention back to her companion. I wasn't sure if she'd heard me or not. Her focus seemed to be elsewhere. What the hell was wrong with everyone tonight? This was not going to be a repeat of the Reston incident. No more alcohol for me tonight. Amin moved my hair off my shoulder slightly to get my attention. Turning around, I placed my glass on the table and scanned the room. Are you sure you're all right? You seem a bit anxious, he said. I'm fine. It's just that the atmosphere of this place seems to have changed. I don't know what it is, but something is off with everyone. I spotted Andrew and Elizabeth again in the dark corner of the dance floor, grinding against each other, kissing passionately. Everyone appeared to have paired off. The entire club had become far more sexual than I'd anticipated it would. The reviews on their website described this place as a nice ambient lounge to enjoy good music and socialize. Something strange was going on. It was as if an aphrodisiac mist were being pumped through the vents, infecting everyone. I turned back to Saya, and I was completely stunned. She had climbed onto the man's lap and had her tongue in his mouth. They were kissing just as passionately as Andrew and Elizabeth. Would you like to dance? Asked Amin. For not even a full second, I thought I saw his eyes glow golden, just like the man in my dreams. It was then I wasn't too sure if I was asleep or awake. Things were getting far too surreal. Sure, I said hesitantly. Smiling, Amin took my hand and led me back to the dance floor. A DJ had replaced the band and was playing Touchness by Enigma, an elegant yet extremely sexual song. It made me tingle. I felt as if my senses were heightened and my very breath reacted to the smell of him. My lungs were filled with ecstasy suddenly. What the hell was happening? This way, he whispered, guiding me through the sea of lust-infected partygoers. We stopped in a little space away from everyone. Dance with me, Anaya. His voice was commanding. I barely knew this guy, but something about his eyes was so familiar to me. He grabbed my hips tightly and pulled me close. Domineering were his eyes. Sensual were his lips. I wanted to kiss them, but I couldn't. Not on the first night. Move with me. His eyes never left mine. We swayed from side to side and turned continuously. Our bodies were touching so vehemently that I could feel the bulge in his pants. It excited me. And it'd been so long since Your body is so soft, like an angel's, he whispered. I blushed at his compliment. Can I ask you something? My voice was quivering and I didn't know why. He nodded with a grin. Why did you approach me? He took hold of my nape and pulled me close to his lips. Something willed me to you. I can't explain it, he said. Willed? I queried. Yes. I was drawn to you. Can you blame me? You're stunning. I pulled away so I could wrap my arms around his head. After years of drought, I couldn't believe this was happening. We continued to sway like a leaf falling from a tree. His scent was hypnotic. I could feel his muscled body through his suit as it pressed against me. For once, I was glad I'd come out of my shell. For once, I was happy Elizabeth asked me out. His body was shaking, as was mine. A sensation from my head to my knees was telling me to go further. A feeling within me was directing me to do the unthinkable, to take him home.
I want to do something, but I'm afraid what it might mean if I do, he said.
And what's that? Our eyes were locked.
This.
He closed his eyes and moved his lips closer to mine. My heart was beating fast. I was rendered speechless by what he was about to do. But I welcomed it. I wanted it. Closing my eyes, I waited for him. I yearned for the feel of his lips on mine. Just as his breath caressed my face, I felt him being pulled back. I opened my eyes, and there was Marquise, with his hand on Amin's shoulder. The man was pissed drunk with bloodshot eyes.
I thought I told you she belonged to me, asshole,
Marquise shouted. Amin threw Marquise's hand from his shoulder and confronted him.
Doesn't seem like the lady even likes you, friend.
Amin stood his ground.
I'm not your damn friend,
Marquise growled. I don't belong to you. I don't even know you, you nutjob, I countered.
You shut the hell up.
He pointed his finger inches from my face. Amin stood between us and pushed Marquise away.
Why don't you get the hell out of here before you make an even bigger fool of yourself than you already have?
Sniffing, Marquise balled his fists.
Fine, I'll leave, but not without my woman.
He reached around Amin and grabbed my arm, then yanked me toward him. Elizabeth and Andrew came rushing to us, having heard Marquise's initial screams over the music.
What's going on? Everything all right?
Asked Andrew. Amin grabbed Marquise's hand and removed it from my arm. They faced off with each other, ready to fight. Your psycho friend here is drunk, and he keeps putting his hands on me no matter how many times I tell him not to. They both looked to Marquise for an explanation.
You promised her to me, remember?
He said to Elizabeth. Her face wrinkled in shock at such a ridiculous accusation. I didn't promise anything to anyone. She's a grown woman who can make her own choices. I'm not her owner, and I sure as shit can't promise her to anyone, Elizabeth hissed.
You said...
I said she's single. That's it, Elizabeth snapped, cutting him off. Andrew insinuated himself between Amin and Marquise and slowly pushed them away from each other.
I think you've had a little too much to drink. Why don't we call it a night?
Andrew placed his hand on Marquise's shoulder and tried to walk him away, but it was no use. Marquise stood firm, still staring at me. This guy was certifiable.
How about you get your damn hand off me?
Marquise spouted.
Look, I'm trying to help you. Does it look like I need your help?
Marquise slapped Andrew's hand from his shoulder. Elizabeth grabbed her man's arms and whispered something in his ear, presumably to keep him from returning the favor.
All right, fine. Stay here. We're leaving,
said Andrew. Elizabeth and Andrew walked away, and I followed with Amin's hand in mine. In the future, I hoped Elizabeth's boyfriend would be more cautious about who he became friends with. I never wanted to see that nightmare of a man again. Saya was still on the couch with the man she'd met. Though they were no longer kissing, she was still sitting on his lap.
Fucking whore!
Shouted Marquise. Amin stopped in his tracks and looked at me. He's not worth it. Please, let's just go, I pleaded of him. I tried to pull him along.
That's right. Follow your sluts out, you white knight betas.
This time, Andrew had stopped as well. Ignore him, babe, said Elizabeth. Marquise walked briskly around the crowd to the couch to gather his things. We tried our best to ignore him as we collected our stuff. What's going on? You're leaving? Asked Saya. She looked confused by everyone's silence. Yes, we're leaving. Let's go, said Elizabeth without elaborating further. Okay, Saya said. She stood from the man's lap
and took out her phone. Bunch of fucking prudes who don't know how to have a good time. Cock-blowing sons of bitches, Marquise mumbled. Andrew had his eyes locked on Marquise, as if he were only seconds away from punching him in the face. Would you like to go someplace for a midnight snack, or are you set on going home? Amin asked me.
I didn't know if I should. Being around him made me feel things I hadn't in a long time. Tonight was already mostly ruined by this guy no one asked to be around. I sure didn't want to spoil it further by sleeping with Amin on the first night. I sighed. I think I should. I know a place up the street that's still open. Their croissants are delicious, Saya interrupted. I squinted at her. That sounds like a plan, Elizabeth said. Andrew nodded. Would you like to come? Saya asked the man she'd been conversing with. Sure, he said in a deep, manly voice. We gathered everything and headed to the door. I'll join you, said Marquise. His voice had become slurred. The hell you will, said Andrew. He pushed Marquise to the side and continued to the door. The rest of us followed. Hey, Andrew, Marquise shouted. As Andrew turned around, that's when everything appeared to have gone into slow motion, as Marquise balled up his fist and punched him square in the face. Andrew tumbled back a bit, but kept his balance. His bottom lip was cut. You fucking asshole! What the hell is your problem? Yelled Elizabeth, launching at Marquise. One of the security guards grabbed her before she could get to him. 2 other guards took hold of Marquise and tossed him out of the club. With him gone, they released Elizabeth, and she immediately comforted her man. Are you all right, babe? Her voice was sympathetic and filled with worry. Andrew held his jaw and shook his head. I'm fine. Can't believe that bastard just sucker punched me, he said. The rest of us stood around there in shock. I looked outside, and Marquise was vomiting on the pavement. Everyone around him watched in disgust. Elizabeth wiped her man's lip and kissed his forehead. Please don't invite people out you barely know, all right? She scolded, but with compassion. Don't worry, babe. I won't. Maybe we should just head home. I've had enough excitement for one night. Anything you want, babe, Elizabeth said in agreement. I was happy about their change of heart. I needed to go home, alone. They'd saved me from doing something I would have later regretted. We left the club to see Marquise lying on the sidewalk, barely conscious. Leaving without me? He slurred. He stood up, stumbling, his shoes covered in his own vomit. Andrew walked up to him, but Elizabeth pulled him back. He's not worth it, babe. Please, let's just go home, she said. Don't get too comfortable in your job. You won't last long, I guarantee it, Andrew said to Marquise as a promise. He didn't pay Andrew any attention and laughed before falling on his ass. Andrew, who seemed to have an overwhelming sense of self-control, just looked at him and walked off. The rest of us shook our heads and left him there to wallow in his filth. I'd known he was going to be a problem the moment I saw him. He'd ruined what could have been a perfect night. Elizabeth waved down a taxi to take us to the train station. It's been fun, Amin. I enjoyed the brief time we spent dancing, I said. Does it have to end? He asked. Yeah, I have a lot of studying to do. I should get home. Once again, it appeared as if his eyes were glowing gold. I blinked, and they were back to the brown they once were. A look of disappointment overcame his face. Of course. It was nice meeting you, even if it was for a finite amount of time. He took my hand and kissed the backs of my fingers. So long, Anaya Myers. I smiled and gazed into his eyes. Lowering his gaze, he released my hand and turned to walk away. that's when I began to wonder how he knew my last name. I didn't remember telling him. "Hey, Amin, wait a second," I said. He didn't acknowledge me. "Hey, wait! Don't you want to exchange numbers?" I shouted to get his attention. Still, he kept walking until he turned a corner, vanishing from my sight. "Amin!" I called. I walked briskly to the corner he'd just turned into. "You coming?" shouted Elizabeth. A taxi had stopped for us. "Give me 1 second." I ran to the side of the building where Amin had gone, but he was nowhere to be found. Like a puff of smoke in the wind, he'd just disappeared. I scanned the side of the building, looking everywhere. "Can't wait forever, lady," yelled the taxi driver. Everyone was waiting for me. "Okay, I'm coming." I gave the area one last glance before joining them in the taxi. Tonight had to be one of the strangest nights I'd ever experienced. As I got into the cab, which was already packed due to Saya inviting the man she met in the club, I heard a voice whisper in my ear. "Opportunity is now lost. You are not ready," someone or something said. It brought me to my knees. The power of it sent chills through me. I flopped into Saya's lap, shaking. "Anaya, are you okay?" she asked. I tried to lift myself, but the voice wouldn't allow it. "I must go. My attempts have failed. I will leave you to your own devices. My power fades. Even now. So long, Anaya Myers." I started to convulse. My mind was in a dream state, and I had no control over it. A flash of light overcame me, and I opened my eyes. There he was, the man from my dreams, the Seraph. As if floating down from the heavens, he came to me in a pure naked flesh. He blew air into my lungs, filling me with joy and sensuality. I loved him. I felt as if I were in love with him. "Anaya, my mortal love, my mortal desire, I have failed. I must wait before I can return to you. I will truly miss you," he whispered with such emotion it almost brought me to tears. What's all this about? Confusion wouldn't be a strong enough word to describe what I was feeling in that moment. "You and I, as it always has been. You must sleep. Sleep, Anaya. Sleep," he said in an echo. He ascended to the light above us. Soon, he had vanished, just like Amin. He was gone, along with the feelings I'd felt the moment these dreams began. It was an emptiness I didn't want or need. Gasping, I awoke in my room with Saya and Elizabeth by my side. I looked around frantically. "What the hell just happened?" I exclaimed. "You passed out. Andrew wanted to take you to the hospital. You were shaking like crazy," said Saya. "How much did you have to drink?" Elizabeth asked. "Not enough, apparently," I joked. Saya placed a glass of water on my nightstand. "Are you okay, Anaya? For a second it was like you were possessed." "I'm fine. That margarita didn't sit well with me," I lied. I couldn't tell them the truth. They'd think I was going insane. Hell, maybe I was going crazy. I'd never experienced anything like that before. Perhaps this Seraph was real after all. I grabbed the glass of water from my nightstand and took a few gulps. If an angelic being possessed me, then I had to find out why. The Seraph said his opportunity was lost, but he didn't say what that meant. I had to dream again to find the truth. "Hey, you guys, come down here quick," shouted Andrew from downstairs. I was a little surprised he was still here.
Sorry, Anaya. We'll be leaving soon. We just wanted to make sure you were all right, said Elizabeth.
It's okay, I think I'm fine now. I set the glass back on the table. Did you bring that guy you met at the club here too? I questioned Saya with a smirk. Well, I was until you started freaking out like you were possessed. I got his number and Facebook info though, she said. I should have suspected as much.
Elizabeth, Saya, get down here. It's Marquise.
Andrew pressed. Please don't tell me he's at our door. I'd call the police if that were the case.
Marquise is the last name I want to hear tonight, said Elizabeth.
I hopped out of bed, and the three of us went downstairs to see what Andrew was yelling about. His eyes were glued to the television. The channel was on the news, where the police, fire trucks, and an ambulance were surrounding the club we'd just left. Not one of us could believe our eyes. The newscaster reported the violent death of someone right outside the club. It was Marquise, torn to pieces, his head caved in, and his skin pale white, as if someone had sucked the soul from his body. It was horrifying.
What the fuck happened to him? Saya exclaimed.
I sat on the couch, covering my gaping mouth with both hands.
They didn't say yet. The reporter talked to some witnesses, who said he started shaking and simply exploded from the inside out,
said Andrew. This couldn't be real. If everything I'd experienced up to this point was in fact real, then that could only mean...
This is insane! If he had come back with us, we probably would have witnessed whatever happened to him firsthand. I can't imagine how traumatizing that would have been, said Elizabeth.
I needed time to wrap my head around all this. I think I need to rest. I've had enough traumas for one night, I said. Slowly, I walked back up the stairs to my room. My dreams would hold the answers. I had to find out the truth. If the Seraph was real, and he did kill Marquise, then I had to know. None of this made sense to me anymore. What exactly was I dealing with?
We're gonna head out, you all. We'll hit you up in the morning, said Elizabeth.
We were all rattled by what we just saw on the television. Elizabeth probably wanted to put this night behind her, as did Andrew and everyone else.
Sure, we'll talk to you tomorrow, said Saya.
I was too stunned to bid them goodbye. I continued up the stairs to my room. I would meet the Seraph on the field of my subconscious and demand answers. I wasn't going crazy. There had to be a rational explanation for all this, and I would find out soon enough. I removed my clothes, took a quick shower, and put on my nightgown. Saya had already gone to bed. Never before had I been afraid to sleep. But this was something I had to do. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I turned off all the lights and closed my eyes. With my brain racing, it was difficult to fall asleep. Nevertheless, once I had, I found something I never thought I would. Darkness. Complete and utter darkness. I was alone. No Seraph to whisk me away, and no dreamland to frolic within. I succumbed to a feeling of emptiness. He'd left me in oblivion. No dreams, no emotional connection, nothing. Damn him.